Hello and welcome to the February edition of Absolute Security's Patch Tuesday updates. As always, I'm joined by Rob Brown, our very own Patch Tuesday guru here at Absolute Security. He's going to run us through those vulnerabilities highlighted this month and give you the best possible advice on how to patch for them. And it looks like we have some weaponized vulnerabilities this month, Rob, so I'll hand it over to you without further ado.
Thanks, Justine. A very warm welcome to everyone joining us. In February, we have a lot of high-risk vulnerabilities. Spoiler alert, a lot of high-risk vulnerabilities to go through today. But first, we're going to talk about the Windows lifecycle. If you're still using Windows Server 2012, this year is the last year of patch support. Once this server operating system goes end of life, you won't be able to patch it any longer. And also with Windows 11 Enterprise 23H2, you have the same end of life scenario there. Only we are aware that some security platforms and antivirus programs will only offer antivirus support if the operating system has a current feature update applied. Now, for Windows 11 to migrate to a future feature update is relatively straightforward, but the server operating systems are definitely more challenging. Some of our customers have said that it's actually a lift and shift rather than a migration. So because you don't have much time left, if you haven't already done so, inventory your Windows servers, find out which ones you do need to migrate, and if you require any assistance at all, do get in contact with us either through the YouTube video or directly on our website, and we can give you some recommendations. For Windows 11 Enterprise 23H2, you have one additional challenge, and that is 23H2 and 24H2 have a significant difference in the operating system architecture. So Microsoft basically rejigged the operating system in 24H2, and this means a direct migration from 23H2 to 25H2 isn't always possible. So in this scenario, you have to go from 24H2 to 25H2, a couple of reboots, and then from 24H2 to our recommended 25H2 is super easy with an enablement package. And you'll find that in your Absolute console as an available patch that will upgrade that feature update. But you do have to be on 24H2 for that enablement package to work. Now, what's special about the enablement package? Well, if you've looked at the sizes of your cumulative updates recently, you will find that they are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. In fact, if we go back to like the early days of Windows 10, they were sometimes 500, 600, 700 megabytes. Now they're 1.5 gigabytes, some of them close to 2 gigabytes. And the reason is because with each cumulative update, Microsoft are slipstreaming the next version of the files as well as the current feature update that's on the system. So you'll find that in the 24H2, you will have files for 25H2 as well. That enablement package is really cool. What it does is it switches the operating system from a 24H2 to a 25H2, and because the files are already there, effectively it's just rebooting into that 25H2 operating system. The good news is that takes about 15 minutes. So to keep support from 24H2 to 25H2 takes anywhere between 15 minutes and 30 minutes, depending on how many reboots you need and how slow the devices are when they're rebooting. The bad news, to go from 24H2 to 25H2 with a upgrade mechanism that's traditional, that could add an extra hour onto the process. So if you're considering doing an upgrade, we recommend leaving it till out of hours or do it first thing in the morning before the users start using the PC, because you can expect an outage of anywhere between an hour and an hour and a half if you have to go through the full stack. Now, if you are using long-term servicing branches, which are not available for purchase anymore, then you do have extended support for both Windows 10 and Windows 11. I think you have support to 2030. So you have plenty of time to worry about the next operating system, probably Windows 12 by the time you need to worry about feature updates. Okay, so we had half the number of fixes in this Patch Tuesday compared to January. And I'm going to ask you to ignore the severities for now. They are very, very important and that they should be part of your strategy. But as we go through some of the really critical updates, you'll find that severity alone is not a really good indicator on what patches should be deployed in your strategy. We had 5 criticals, 52 important, 1 moderate. 5 are more likely to be weaponized out of the 58, minus 6 because 6 are weaponized. Those 6 weaponized vulnerabilities are probably the highest number of weaponized vulnerabilities we've seen in the last 12 months. So this is exceptional. There are some stars. The 3 stars indicate a weaponized vulnerability that is solved with a patch that is also public aware. So this is like a double whammy. This is like a double threat vulnerability. If a vulnerability is weaponized, it means it's being actively detected by the operating system vendor. So in Microsoft's case, but also weaponized is used across third-party applications as well. They get the data through their antivirus partners and they feed that data to us and we populate that in the Absolute console. When something is weaponized, it means that it is under active attack and it should be an accelerator within your organization to resolve them urgently. And depending on whether you have automation involved, a weaponized vulnerability should be accelerated far faster than normal patches from Patch Tuesday. Public aware means the precise method that can be used to exploit a vulnerability is published on the internet. Somebody via a bug bounty program or via YouTube, which we know from Log4j a couple of years back, somebody has published the exact way to exploit one of the vulnerabilities. And if it's weaponized and public aware, that's where you have this sort of double threat. Someone has told potential exploitists or hackers how to exploit a vulnerability, and they're given the precise method to do it, and it's currently under active attack. So if you take the 2 together, we call that an accelerator. It's very important that those be remediated as a priority, regardless of the severity. And finally, jump points. These are vulnerabilities that, if exploited, are able to jump out of the immediate security scope of the vulnerability. For example, if you have a vulnerability in Microsoft Word, then you can perhaps jump out of it into Excel, or potentially from the operating system into other areas of your network and leave breadcrumbs throughout your environment to get access to your environment remotely in the event that we finally patch the original threat. That is why jump points are super serious. And if you have jump points available, we need to make sure we close them because that is where you have the potential to sort of land and expand inside an organization. So we're going to talk about those in just a second. If you are a Absolute customer, then you'll be able to use all of the patch details I've mentioned in your console to make the right strategy. If we take a look at the bug leaderboard, we have different types of bugs, have different risks within your organization. And in this case, we have the same exact bug leaderboard order as we had last month, but we just have slightly less vulnerabilities in each. The elevation of privilege, this is actually an interesting vulnerability because this is where you might use one of those land and expand types of vulnerabilities. We have 25 fixes. This is where a threat actor gains access to an employee's account or uses it to bypass the proper authorization channel and grants themselves access to data they're not supposed to have. So if you can sort of use somebody's account, grant access to your environment remotely, and then leave it for a couple of months, perhaps by the time you launch your exploit, there's no evidence or sort of data to pinpoint the fact that this exploit was planned several months ago. It looks as part of the ecosystem. So very, very serious. But what is more serious is the remote code execution type of bug. There are 12 of these, and that's an actual class of cyber attack. And that's where attackers remotely execute commands or they place malware on your system or other malicious code on your computer or network. Now, a remote code execution vulnerability can be used through a sort of a push method, so you can push it to a device, but it also is susceptible to a user clicking icons or clicking files on the system. For example, putting something into the user's OneDrive that looks like a Word document, a salary document, a spreadsheet kind of thing, but actually it's an executable, and that can launch the cyber attack onto the PC. Of course, that helps if your users don't click things. But that being said, remote code execution vulnerabilities should be prioritized. They are the most serious. Spoofing, we have 7 of those. That's where an attacker pretends to be someone else to gain access. Typically just phishing. Information disclosure, that's really interesting. That's where a vulnerability can expose something that you're not supposed to expose, such as sensitive information in the memory. So if you accessed or if you were able to exploit a server, you might be able to read passwords in clear text. And of course, if you've got your CEO's password going into memory and being read in clear text, then that is very serious. Now, the security feature bypass, the 5 are in red. That is because the 3 vulnerabilities that are both weaponized and public aware are security feature bypasses. Now that's where a vulnerability that allows an attacker to bypass the security mechanisms that stop you from accessing or running something without disabling it. So it's effectively bypassing those protections that are in place that are supposed to not allow someone to run something on a system. And that basically affects, makes the security mechanism that is protecting the operating system from these legal accesses, basically renders it useless. So you can see where a security feature bypass vulnerability could be used in a land and expand type of exploit in the future, where they're leaving something on the system for a future attack. So pay particular attention. And lastly, but not least, certainly not the least serious, is denial of service. We have 3 of those fixed in this Patch Tuesday. That's just where you overwhelm the system, making it inaccessible or just stopping the system from responding. Okay, now we'd like to use a risk-based profile that takes multiple elements into consideration, because we can't just, and we shouldn't, as I've explained today, we shouldn't just use the vendor severity as the single point of truth for the urgency in which we would like to remediate in our organization. A lot of our clients are across continents. They've got lots of different language operating systems, lots of different operating systems used by many users across multiple time zones. So we're not always able to deploy every update to every system at the same time. So what we want to do is build a sort of a strategy where we remediate the most serious ones first, followed maybe 3 or 4 days later by the next priority, 3 or 4 days later, followed by the next set of priorities. And that allows us to roll out the most serious, close off the gaps first for the most serious type of vulnerabilities, but also be aware of the network usage that's going to be consumed by such large rollouts of patches. And of course, when reboots are considered, then criticals usually should always be rebooted. High and important sometimes do. Medium, low, and NA severities generally don't need to be rebooted, but you do need to pay attention. So the factors that we take into consideration is, of course, the vendor severity. The vendor severity is the original source of truth for the severity of a vulnerability. You should always take them into account. They are from critical, high, or important, medium, low, and NA. Obviously, critical is the most serious, NA is the least. The CVSS score is a score out of 10. It's independently assigned both by the original vendor, but also by an independent body that reclassifies the score based on how the vulnerability can be exploited, how serious the vulnerability could pose to an organization if it's exploited, whether users have to be involved, etc. And that gives us a score out of 10, 10 being the equivalent of critical and 0 being the equivalent of NA. Now, when you combine the two together, you have a balance. And as we see in our recommendations, you will see where the vendor and the CVSS score don't align perfectly. But if you have the two together and you combine them together, you are able to select the vulnerabilities that are the most risky for you. Weaponized, as we mentioned, are under active attack. Public aware, where the blueprint is available on the internet to go and exploit. Be aware, not all public aware vulnerabilities become weaponized. In fact, I think it's somewhere between 5 and 10% of public aware vulnerabilities become weaponized. But I certainly wouldn't want to be an IT manager that saw a vulnerability that was public aware, not very severe, decided not to roll it out just because it didn't look like it was serious enough, and then suddenly it becomes weaponized, and then my network gets exploited. Countermeasures offer some balance. Countermeasures are really useful when a vendor gives you a countermeasure, which could be a mitigation or a workaround, such as there is a registry key that you can apply, or a Windows policy that you can enable that effectively renders the vulnerability resolved. You can go ahead and deploy those countermeasures. So if you see countermeasures are available, go to the vendor's website or use the Absolute console to go and deploy those countermeasures. They can often give you time to plan the rollout of these big updates by resolving the vulnerability first. Do pay particular attention when you see a vulnerability that is which has a countermeasure, and you deploy the countermeasure. If the vendor recommends to reverse the countermeasure after you have patched the vulnerability, do go and roll those countermeasures back. Leaving registry keys and policies on systems that are not used could pose a future risk. And lastly, probably the most important is your exposure. So we balance everything together based around your exposure, and we say the risk that you are prepared to take of this high or important severity vulnerability that is weaponized and is public aware, that's on 95% of your environment, versus a critical vulnerability that is on 50 or 60%, probably should be the weaponized one first, just because the exposure is greater and therefore the risk is much higher. Now, what we're going to do is look at some of those risks. So what we'd like you to do is to pop across to absolute.com. We actually publish this on Patch Tuesday, so the latest data is available for you on Patch Tuesday. If you pop across to absolute.com, you'll find our resources section. Now, on our resources section, actually on the main site, if you are considering protecting your organization from attack, or if you are looking at ways to increase or accelerate patch management without the risk of downtime, do get in contact. We have some fantastic technology that will help you to restore operation very, very quickly. And that conversation could be done through the chat, or if you'd like to speak to us, we could cover those in about 15 minutes. For Patch Tuesday, under the resources section, you'll find our Absolute blog. Now, our Absolute blog is not just for Patch Tuesday. There's some fantastic material here around that resilience approach that we're talking about. Also, some fantastic words from our own CISO on areas of your organization that you should protect that actually could be gaps in your security strategy. The Patch Tuesday comes on Patch Tuesday, and we have a really cool download as well. So let's get into it. So although we do have not as many vulnerabilities to talk about today as we had last month, we do have this sort of risk and this trend I'm seeing this year, where these vulnerabilities that are being released can be used in sophisticated exploits. And we just want to bring some education to you about the types of vulnerabilities that are used in active attacks that perhaps wasn't used in 2025. Starting with preview panes. Preview panes are amazing from an efficiency standpoint, but they are a high risk attack vector. This month, we have two vulnerabilities that are that can be attacked through a preview pane. CVE 2026-21260 and 21511. These are both Microsoft Outlook spoofing vulnerabilities. Now, in these cases, malicious content that is inside an email that is sent and simply previewed inside of Microsoft Outlook, even though there are no attachments or any links as such, can execute that code on the system. Now, we can't blame the users in this case because it's just an email. They're opening the preview, they're not clicking a link, and they're not clicking an attachment. So this particular preview pane risk sort of removes the barriers that we say, don't click anything, don't download anything unless you know where it comes from. You can work around this by turning off the preview pane in Microsoft Outlook. And by the way, the preview pane isn't just used in Outlook, it's used in Word, it's used in Excel, it's also used in Windows as well. Super useful from an efficiency standpoint. But unfortunately, this type of vulnerability should be treated as a risk, as a structural risk in your organization, not just an edge case that might exploit. Those emails get sent out. If they're not caught by your email phishing system, then any user just opening an email, looking at it in the preview pane, can unfortunately fall to these types of risks. So do make sure you deploy those Microsoft Outlook updates urgently. The next three, and thankfully one of them is already fixed, addressed by Microsoft, is the scope change. That's the land and expand risk, where you can exploit one particular vulnerability, leave some breadcrumbs in the organization to access it in a future date. CVE 2026-21231 and 21255. The first one being a Win32 elevation of Win32K elevation of privilege vulnerability. Where have we heard that before? That's actually been weaponized already this year, and last year was probably weaponized 5 times. Come on, Microsoft, let's fix this vulnerability for good, please. We're talking about it far too often. The second, though, 21255. This is a type of vulnerability that does make the hair on my arms stand up. It is a Hyper-V security feature bypass vulnerability. Now, if you're familiar with Hyper-V, it's virtualization. So a system like a Windows Server or a Windows 11 machine can be a host for virtual machines on site. And you have servers that will have production servers actually as virtual guests. You also have test systems as virtual guests as well. A scope change could allow you to jump from one of the guests to the hosts and vice versa. So an exploit on any public facing servers that are guests, maybe potentially test systems that don't have the full security stack as your production servers, could still be attacked this way. Why it's so important that you prioritize this one. Get them deployed, especially if you have internet facing systems, because you do need to close that lateral movement risk in your organization. The last one, 24302. This is Azure Arc. Obviously, this is a an Azure Cloud vulnerability. Microsoft already fixed it. Thank you, Microsoft. But this one is purely released for transparency. However, just because you see the word Azure doesn't mean it's a vulnerability automatically addressed by Microsoft. A lot of the servers in Azure can be protected from the Azure platform, but some of those operating systems in Azure will also have server-based fixes too. So just because you see the word Azure does not mean you're automatically protected. You still may have server-side fixes to apply. And lastly, my last three recommendations is 21510. This is a Microsoft Shell security feature bypass vulnerability. We've seen that one as well before, at least 3 or 4 times in the last 12 months. The Microsoft Smart Screen is there to protect you from not accessing a part of your system you're not supposed to have. So effectively, if you can get around the smart system, then what is supposed to stop me from accessing that area of the operating system doesn't work. So that's where we can sort of potentially get into land a pretty dangerous exploit in the future. So surprised. 21513 MSHTML. MSHTML. This is what Microsoft said, but actually MSHTML is Internet Explorer. It's back. There is a fix for Internet Explorer. I didn't think I'd be saying this 12 months after, or even more since it was retired. But if you still have Internet Explorer on your systems, and obviously there must be a significant number of users still using Internet Explorer because Microsoft released a fix for it. That is a security feature bypass as well, which is super serious. Finally, 21514, the Microsoft Word security feature bypass vulnerability. Again, super serious if you've got Office products installed. It's not just laptops, it's desktops, it's also VDIs. Those virtual environments have a lot of the Word products installed as well. Get those patched as urgently as you can. So some practical recommendations. Please prioritize those Office updates, as I mentioned. Fast track the scope change so that you close off that land and expand. And most importantly, from a patching strategy standpoint, don't just deploy the critical vulnerabilities because you're worried about the impact of any user outage that's experienced by deploying unknown vulnerabilities of other severities. I can assure you exploits are happening with not just critical severity. Leverage endpoint resilience however you can. Make sure that your systems can be restored to a good working state that will bring your system back online very, very quickly. Don't just deploy the criticals because you're worried about the impact. Try to build some resilience into your organization that allow you to rehydrate those machines in the event of anything going wrong with them. And if you'd like to know more about that, please do get in contact. We'd love to discuss that further. Everything I've discussed so far, plus all of the other vulnerabilities, are available on our download sheet. You don't have to put any thought into this. Just take that CVE from here, pop it into your tool set. Your action plan is the priority that you are going to roll this out. Priority 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. Those are the orders in which you are going to deploy these. Doesn't take very long. We add all of the data, including the weaponized, the public aware, and the risk score. So anything that's 50 is the highest risk, combining all those elements together. Pop those into your strategy and deploy them as quickly as you can to keep your environment safe. Thank you so much for joining us today. Like I said, we love the comments, and if there's anything we could do to help, please go and contact us through the Absolute website. And until March, I wish you happy patching.
Thanks for a very thorough and useful roundup, Rob, as always. We wouldn't expect anything else, of course. I was just thinking about the Internet Explorer, and I do believe that people are starting to use this more again, simply because you can have the side-by-side Copilot features.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
That's interesting.
So it's worth understanding a user community and the tools that they're using. Obviously, that factors into your own context and how you should prioritize patches. And with several greatest hits CVEs resurfacing, is it worth, can I get you to explain the term supersedence before
Mm.
we go?
Yeah. It's supersedence is actually a fascinating concept where you have a patch that's released at some point in the past. That patch is then replaced fully or partially by the next patch in the chain, called a supersedence chain. And when you are scanning a device, perhaps it's a device that's been in the cupboard. Maybe it's a laptop that you bring out once a month or once a quarter to do something with Internet Explorer, filling in some timesheets. That device is actually potentially missing 20 or more individual updates since it's been offline. But with a tool that can identify that supersedence chain, it offers only the latest updates to the system, which means you have a very efficient and reduced deployment time for only the very latest updates, getting the system patched much, much faster than putting everything that potentially could be 3 months old coming forward. But at the same time, some customers don't like to deploy the very latest updates. In financial and retail, there potentially are patches that are just too new, don't have a huge amount of exposure. So they want to deploy one supersedence chain back because those are the ones that have been tested for at least 30 days. So having the ability to always deploy to the very latest and only deploy efficiently the very latest update is what we have in our Absolute console. But if you need to go one version back or two versions back, depending on its publish date, you can still deploy older patches if needed.
Great. I think that's explained quite eloquently why patching isn't easy. It's difficult, and if you're doing it manually, you're really tying your hands behind your back, aren't you? Um, yes, modern tools with automation and supersedence management, of course, for the win. Um, as Rob mentioned, if you're in need of specific advice about resilience or patching, then you can contact us via the website or use the QR code here. And of course, thank you very much for joining us and watching us. We really appreciate your time and your feedback. And don't forget to like and subscribe.